Welcome back to Insight Club. Today we're talking about anger and the pain of not knowing. Stick around. The first rule of Insight Club is you don't talk about Insight Club. You do Insight Club. The second rule of Insight Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Insight Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Insight Club.
You ask yourself, where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
So I bet you know what line stuck out to me this time. It was, we all want to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
We all want to avoid suffering.
And the way of avoiding suffering can be very different for each person. But
Yeah.
some of it is about staying to emotions that are more easily felt, like anger, as we're talking here,
Yeah.
than going into the lower vibrations of sadness, doubt, shame, or whatever it is.
Will you share what you said about the Buddhist teaching about suffering and the arrows?
Yes. So in the Buddhist teachings, there's this teaching of the second arrow, which basically it's you can be hurt by an arrow, hit by an arrow, and that will bring pain. But the suffering comes when you start thinking, why me? Who hit me? Why they did this to me? All of these feelings and questions that we bring, the things that we make it mean, the meaning that we make of it is the suffering.
Yeah. And I was telling you, I was listening to a really interesting debate on YouTube, and it was the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was some well-known philosophers, physicists, and it was intended to be a debate about like what are the origins of the universe and did God create it or something like this. They didn't state a thesis and an antithesis. It wasn't that kind of debate where there were sides and points. It was more of a panel conversation. And I found it so fascinating that in the conversation, so they said, one of the things that people often bring up as how would you explain this if there is an omnipotent God is the idea of suffering. They're like, if there's this omnipotent God, like how is there suffering? And I found it really interesting because firstly, I found it interesting to know that that's kind of a question in theology and it like circling around theology. Apparently this is the prime one that people go to all of the time. I thought that was fascinating because I believe very clear, like to me, it's clear, I never would question it, that humans created suffering, that this is something that doesn't exist externally in the world. It's not a thing. It's not a force. It's simply in our own mind. Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about this. To me, that just makes sense in what you're saying about it's the second arrow, right? It's the pain that we create internally. That's why me, and oh my goodness. And I almost imagine it like an oyster with a grain of sand and it's, making a pearl, right? It's like, it's inflammation. There's the grain of sand is truly there, but then what do you create around it? That's the suffering in my mind. So I was really fascinated to hear that like these very wise thinkers are still stuck believing that suffering is this external force. And that was the reason that they were having this block around. I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury wasn't having a block. His description of the cosmos made a lot of sense to me, which was just that God is love, and that's why there's something and not nothing. And then God is not inside the system in the same way the painter is not inside the painting, but the energy is there, and the energy is like bringing everybody into oneness. I was like, that makes sense. But maybe that is like a good place to ground us, because this, we all want to avoid suffering is right there in our intro. But do we I think, create a lot of suffering. And if there is suffering, I think it's only something we create. So I'm going to just pause at that. I'm going to have that as my working assumption as we move through this conversation, because we wanted to talk about like some specific, like, why do we feel suffering around information changing, around what we think we know and what we don't know, and uncertainty. But is that ringing true to you, what I'm saying about suffering, or do you have
Yeah.
things to add
And
that I missed?
actually, there's one thing that I love about this, that we just realized that we made an assumption in our own intro. Like, we assume that everyone wants to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
And now we came back around and you're questioning, like, do we actually want to avoid suffering? And I think we do want to avoid suffering, as long as the the suffering is the worst thing. But if we have something that is even worse than that suffering, then we might create another form of suffering that is concealing that other thing that would be worse.
That sounds right to me. Do you want to fill that in a little bit? I mean, that rings true. Let's see if we can,
Yeah.
make it more tangible.
So we mentioned, like, choosing different emotions, right? Like, for example, anger instead of sadness. That's a very common one. Or instead of grief, instead of, you can fit in shame, whatever it is that is the lower emotion. That's one thing. Like, the arrow could be like, I'm gonna be angry at, like, who did this to me, or like, why, even like, why me, and all these kinds of things, because it's easier to guilt someone or put it out of me than thinking, for example, I should have been wearing an armor in this situation, or uh, feeling the shame, the not the shame, the guilt or something like that, because I haven't protected myself. I should know better, or anything like that. Which it's doesn't have to be true. It might be that it happened, and it's just okay. It happened. Now let's just remove it and heal the wound, and that's it. I don't have to make anything about it, but I can try to put some other emotion in front of it, and some other thought in front of it, to not feel what I was defaulting in feeling.
Yeah.
And usually it can come, like, the other thing that we brought here, the not knowing. Like, we can create the suffering around, for example, what you were saying, like, why God created suffering, and that doesn't make any sense. And that's a question that I think everyone goes through in some point of their life.
Yeah.
And it's actually a way of bringing back control, in feeling like, oh, then there's no God, so I have a certainty
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
which is better than the feeling of, then if God exists, he doesn't love me,
Yes.
or I'm being
Yes.
punished.
God exists, but he don't care. Yeah. There's also wrapped up in this assumption about suffering and, God creating suffering. There's an assumption that learning and the pain of learning is a bad thing. Because when I say suffering is internal, some people may say, like, no, what I mean by suffering is not what you guys are talking about, but like, why are there children in war zones? Why is there famine? Things like this, where you see humanity is like struggling. Human beings are struggling, and we're making the assumption that the struggle of existence is a bad thing, as opposed to part of the experience, and that growing through adversity is like a flaw in the plan as opposed to part of the plan. And I think it sounds really callous, and it's hard to make, hear him sitting in an armchair, in a room with heating, right? And it sounds very callous, like, oh, you're saying somebody who is even in my own city, right? There are people who are like without homes in freezing weather. So it's not some people deserve this and some people deserve that. It's one unit. I think like what we forget when we look at the pain is that it's just one thing. Like it's one consciousness going through this experience. And like all of these different, individualized points are thinking we're separate. I'm going through like I'm a person and I'm separate and I'm doing the stuff. It's one being having an existence of living, and that's like far beyond my ability to comprehend. I can say it, but I can't really comprehend it. But so this maybe just opens up a bigger conversation that I don't have enough wisdom to really talk about with any kind of conviction, or say something that makes sense. But my point is that even like the idea that pain is bad and that struggle is bad, those are assumptions.
Yeah.
That it's an assumption that those things are somehow like flaws in what's going on. And what a scary thought it is to just fully trust and lean back in faith. And I had this clarity yesterday. I had a lot of new moon downloads. I had a lot of like, whoa, okay, I see it. But thinking about how there's this very subtle, fine difference between, wow, God is way bigger than I am, and I trust, and that like feels so good, versus, oh, God is way bigger than I am, and God must resent me for being so small, and I can never really deserve the love of the all. And I think a lot of people go through life with that baseline suffering of there is something greater than me and I'm too shitty to ever deserve it. And man, I kind of resent God for making me shitty. Like, why am I so small and you're so great, right? It can turn into resentment. And it's such a delicate, fine, subtle line between one. So here we are, I guess to just bring it back around to where we started. Here we are, a lot of us, most of us, sometimes all of us maybe, in this space of uncertainty, feeling like there's probably something going on we don't know about, we can't know about. Is it even for my good? I don't know. I can't tell. The universe is just too vast and mysterious. So doesn't it make sense that we default to the why me suffering, or even the anger to cover that suffering? Like the fact that those are so widespread among humans to me makes sense, because it's real easy to fall from, I relax into, like, my cat when he's sitting on my lap, he really doesn't care that like he would be falling off unless I was holding up his butt. Like he's so sprawled out. He's like, oh yeah. I'm like, dude, I'm holding you up. And he's like, yeah, isn't it great?
Yeah.
Like, he's got full faith that this is where he's meant to be and he's doing what he's meant to be. And like, that's the kind of faith I aspire to. But I, a lot of times, am in the like, why am I so small, and how come I can't know what the bigger plan is?
Yeah. That's a big one. That happens to that thing that you brought up with your cat. I think it's interesting because that happens with animals who never went through a traumatic event. Because when they do, usually they start getting very scared about anything that challenges that thing that they experienced.
Yeah.
right? That resembles that thing that they experienced.
Yeah, lots of things seem unsafe.
Yeah, and that's the basis of uh, why we create so much suffering as well. Like we experience pain, and instead of working through it and transmuting it, we make meaning of it, and we somewhere in our mind make it a note that this is what happens when this happens. So be careful of this thing.
Yeah.
And that comes back to what we were talking that started this conversation, like why when we why humans are so uh, angry and outrageous when questioned about things that it's supposed to be a certainty.
Yeah. So what struck this all off was I found myself getting very angry with the new headlines that are coming out that are saying, the C word was now they're saying like most likely, it was a lab leak. Well, okay, great. So all of the reporters who were asking that question and getting fired and their careers were taken away and their lives were threatened, like, are they getting rehired with back pay? That's so I feel my anger come up and I'm like, oh,
And
I
some
don't want to.
people were rehired already.
Were they?
Yes.
Were they? Oh,
Yes.
wow. You just took the sail, like the wind out of my snark sail. That's amazing. So like there's information that's presented as new, but I'm like, I already knew this and this was already a thing. And so there's definitely ego in that, right? There's the hurt ego.
Yeah.
There's the feeling of, you harmed people, you harmed their livelihoods, but a lot of people took their lives. This is something that's like I think not talked about a lot is the death toll from people who were pushed out of work, pushed out of society. That has a death toll as well. But then it's like, okay, I'm getting angry because of information, but the whole kerfuffle happened in the first place because people got angry because of information. So it's like, why do we get angry when we hear information? And if we were living in curiosity and from love, then it'd be like, oh, new information, cool, great, let's integrate it now. Now we can
Yeah.
act with like now we have more information, we can do something that's more likely to get us good results, right? Like why could information have the power to make me viscerally angry? And then how did we get into a place where we've staked our like egoic existential survival on these mass beliefs? It's this way or it's that way, it's A or it's B.
I need to start with saying that from my point of view, which in this case, it's similar to your point of view, I feel like your anger is righteous anger.
Yeah, that's the problem. I'm like, but I'm righteously angry. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
say more about that. What? Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, what you acknowledge, like, yes, there is the anger of knowing that our worldview, our point of view was challenged, and there's also that pride, because it's an anger mixed with pride that
Yes.
I was right about this and no one would listen to this.
Yes.
Right?
Feeling vindicated. Yes.
Yeah. But that, like you said, that doesn't fix what was made wrong with that. And we have a hard time dealing with suffering from things that we can't change. It's that, and even that suffering of knowing that it's not just a shift in reality, like you mentioned as well, like that there's these reality shifts and things that we're supposed to believe, but also the fear that comes with, like, okay, so anyone can say what's correct to believe, and even if all our intuition, our body, our gut is saying something else, we need to still like go with it even if we don't believe, or we either get punished or we need to find a way to live as an outsider within
Yeah.
this reality.
Yeah.
uh, so there's fear in it that sparks the anger as well.
Uh, Thank you. That makes so much sense, and I really relate to the feeling of being an outsider. And, um, there's a pain, and then I've created a suffering. But there is a pain in continually shutting down your voice
Yeah.
and being in the presence of people who are saying, "This is a thing and this is true," and everything in you is like, "I that doesn't sound right to me." And it further not only does it not sound right to me, but what it really sounds like is you're parroting the propaganda speaker that's blaring. And it actually hurts my heart to, like, see people I care about, I love, I respect, I think are intuitive, I think are wise. It hurts to hear them parrot the propaganda speaker. And I'm like, "Can't isn't your heart telling you that's there's something wrong there?" But there is a pain. This is so helpful. And for me, that's a very core wound because my like deepest core wound is like being rejected, right? You're not part of this and you're rejected and you're bad and you're wrong for that. And so I'm like reliving that anytime I'm hearing the conversation that's echoing the propaganda machine. And I'm like, that's not, but I won't say anything for fear. It's like a double bind,
Yeah.
right? I fear being rejected, so I don't speak up, but then I still internally feel rejected because I'm disconnected um
And shut
and I
myself.
yeah, and I just, I think again and again about like what if I could be that farmer in the parable and people are like, "Oh, it's bad." And you're like, "Oh, is it?" It's like that's all I want. I want to hear, and you talked about this. I think it was before we got on. Will you say again what you said about somebody who really has that faith and the
Yeah. So we talked about, I can't remember which episode, but we talked about this in an episode where we were talking about, it was right in the beginning, and we were talking about faith and beliefs and like religions and so on, and all the assumptions around that, and how people who have a belief system, a more dogmatic belief system, where you believe in these laws and these things because you're supposed to, uh, tend to get really angry and frustrated when someone challenges what they believe or does something that goes against their belief system, because it's a belief, it's not a knowing experience living. So anything that challenges their worldview makes them feel like their ground is crumbling, like they don't have where to stand anymore, and they need to protect that faith of theirs. Where people who live their spirituality, and I'm not saying this or that religion is better, it's just like whatever belief system that you have, but that you live your spirituality from a place of knowing, from a place of personal experience, that's a more um, mystic way of living, no matter which belief is, they can accept someone thinking differently or having a different view, or even being like, I don't believe in anything that you're saying. Like, okay, that's your right of I know what I experienced,
yes,
and you know what, I can pass it on to you because it's my experience.
it doesn't feel like a threat. And so that's why, in bringing up this topic, we had like the pain of not knowing or the pain of doubt. And that, I mean, maybe ironically or maybe beautifully in the cosmic symphony, doubt is often the seed of being adamant, right? The doubt comes up, and so we have that need to strongly re restate, right? Like if I'm really in the faith and somebody says something, I'm like, huh, interesting. But if what they say just sparks the littlest bit of doubt, then I'm like, no, and I have to argue. So the people who sound the most certain, and I mean, now we're getting into we're in an era of human culture where certainty is not just about argument, or maybe this has been I guess it's been human culture the whole time, but certainty, then there's legislation, there are like social mores, there are, consequences. um the like the certainty uh that has all these very real things, like you will lose your job unless you get this jab, which, oh, by the way, turns out was totally experimental and has all of these health complications now we're seeing. But the certainty was there, covering the doubt, and it has these very real actions in the world. And I think even stronger, I mean, I'm trying to imagine a world ruled by people who really just feel that first kind of faith you described. It's hard to imagine them really wanting to force and coerce others into doing stuff.
It's really interesting because when you have conversations with people who are more like this, and I'm blessed to be able to have conversations like that, including with you. It's often based on, I can't even describe what I experienced, because it was real for me. And the other, even if we can't explain, the other person has that feeling of, I feel you, I understand you, I wasn't there with you, but I can feel what you're feeling. As opposed when you talk about things like that, or you try to with someone who can't grasp, people feel threatened in some way. Or when they're more open, they might feel like, I wish I could experience that to actually believe, which is something that I heard as well.
I think all human beings are equipped with a capacity, and then it's up to them whether they nurture the capacity. I think all human beings are equipped with a capacity to know when they and others are acting in love, or acting from love. And for me, that's what makes it easy to be like open and delighted by somebody sharing an experience that I've never. So I think I mentioned this when we talked about the drones, but when Grady was younger, he and his whole family had an experience of ETs.
Yeah.
And I haven't had that experience. So it's almost like hearing a song in a different language, where you're like, oh, I get the vibe, but I don't know the lyrics. Right. And so I'm like, whoa, that sounds amazing. Like I can just listen and be like, I can see how that impacted you. And when he and his family talk about it, it's like, whoa, I see what you're feeling, even though I don't have like a way, something to compare it to in my own life. I can't say like, oh, I know exactly what that's like. And, and that's like a brilliant way we can cross the space between your experience and my experience.
Yeah.
And so when I'm listening to conversations about like, this is true and this is not true, and I'm like, yeah, my love meter is at -70, it's like there's zero love, there's zero intention of love in anything you're doing right now. I mean, maybe it doesn't even matter what is the propaganda that's being spoken. This is like, I only hear from you the desire to manipulate and the desire to control. There's no love. There's no humility. There's no self-responsibility. And it's like that's just such a turn off.
Yes. I talking about this, I want to come back to that point that you brought up of the certainty,
Yeah.
because you talked about the wounds, like the rejection and so on. The certainty, even though it might be concealed as confidence, as like I know things that you don't know, or like knowledge, wisdom, and so on, it's often actually coming from the wound of insecurity. It's just arrogance disguised as certainty.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, I feel like we all know it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say we all know it, I mean, I think we all are able to read when a person is speaking and
It
acting from that.
it's easy to identify in others. It's harder to identify in ourselves. And
Yes.
I can tell you, it's very. I. It comes back to the suffering. It's very painful when you identify that with in yourself. I had moments now, like being a little bit more self-aware, where I could identify, shit, I'm being arrogant. This is awful.
Yeah.
That's my insecurity speaking. And it's painful. It's terribly painful. It's way worse than feeling like you were wounded by someone and then like
Yeah.
you can blame someone. No, it's you seeing that you've been a bad human at that moment.
Yeah. And then there's the choice to continue suffering about it. And one of the
Yeah.
most powerful things that I learned was to discharge the shame. Feel the guilt, but don't let it metastasize into shame. And that's what's actually helped me become less angry and kinder. Did I tell you about my customer service adventures lately?
No. you told me a few. I don't know if there's more.
Well, I mean, I'm just always like, I have a history of being like a really shitty person when I'm on customer service, and I get off the phone and I literally feel nauseous. Like I feel sick
Mm.
to my stomach about how I've acted. And so I had a kind of climactic moment of, hitting a low where I was on with somebody, realized that what I was being charged for was actually correct. I just hadn't understood it, like all of my anger was for nothing, but I was still angry. And so I'm yelling in an angry tone, I hope I'm the worst person you talk to today. I hope your day only gets better from here. And I got off the phone and I started cracking up because I was like, I experienced the incongruity of I was still hyped up, like all my body, my physicality was still in anger, but my brain knew enough, my spirit kicked in and was like, Megan, you're wrong. This person is, and I just laughed and laughed and laughed. And that enabled me to be curious. And I started
Yeah.
going down this road and I said, why do I get so angry? Because before this, I would say, I would get on the phone and I'd be like, this time I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to yell. It never worked. But because I hit that moment of incongruity where I was like, Megan, you're ridiculous. Like you are literally yelling at this guy to have a good day. I went, what is this?
Love and light. Love and
Yeah.
light.
And I traced it back to a core wound. I
Yeah.
was like, why does that trigger me? So, okay, I traced it back to a core wound. So the next time I was on a customer service call, instead of going, I'm not going to yell, I said, I'm going to pay attention when I start getting that feeling of the wound. I'm going to pay attention. And when that feeling of the wound came up, I slowed down and I asked for help. And I said, I'm sorry. Thank you for being patient with me. I still don't understand. Can you please explain it to me just, like point by point? And he did, and it was fine. I didn't yell, like it got resolved. But trying to combat the anger, nothing.
Yeah.
Didn't work. Acknowledging there was a wound there, paying attention to it, asking myself why, making the connection, and then paying attention to that feeling and flipping the script. So here I am, I'm feeling that core wound. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to reach out and ask for help.
You acknowledge the uncertainty.
I acknowledge the uncertainty, and also like, hey, this is the thing that anger is covering up.
Yeah.
And what's another way to get help for that thing that anger is covering up? Oh, super simple. Ask for help. Like that's what the little me who has the core wound didn't know how to do. And
Yeah.
and it was revelatory. It was absolutely revelatory. Anyway, I kind of like took us off track there, but it's
No, no.
real. Like we can 100% be empathic with ourselves that the pain of uncertainty is very real. It's probably going to trigger a lot of core wounds. Probably, for some of us, it'll be like not being accepted or not being heard or having our voices shut down. These are real things. And I would love for people to be able to feel and heal.
Yes.
But we have to remove that anger level.
I can see how this can be for the people, most of the people that were angry at the questions that we were talking before about the massive experiment that we had on Earth.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people were scientists or people who tell themselves that they live by science. And one of the things that they worked against their whole lives was everything that's called pseudoscience, the conspiracy theories, all the things that go against that label that they treat as God, like science.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that created problems as well, like treating science as a dogma instead of something that it's meant to be tested and questioned and try and see what's the best way, and if it's not the best, try something else, which was what it was supposed to be in the first place. So the place of putting that as science and all the fear that was behind it as well, that made people uh, want to go faster with everything than what true science needs to be.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
miracle.
yeah,
Nobody's been able to decode a virus this quickly, but suddenly, magically, we did. Yeah.
yes,
And then that's it's such a helpful point that the uncertainty was this existential threat to people who base their whole lives on uncertainty. And that's a conflation that I would love to see disentangled. The idea that science is certainty. Science is a
Mm.
process. It's a really helpful process for learning about a lot of things in the external world. Right? But it's the body of knowledge is not certainty. If that were the case, we could never come up with new theory. We just no to be valuable.
Is it my internet or yours? I think we're coming back. It's too weak.
I guess talk about these things at your own risk. It makes your internet cut out.
Was it mine or yours? I think
I
it's
don't
back.
know. I don't know. But interesting that this is the topic that makes our internet go out.
It's still a little bit weird. Okay. I'm gonna stop my cam for a moment.
Okay.
Better?
I don't know. I think so. It's probably mine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay now.
Okay. Um,
We brought a topic that it's not the best to talk on the internet.
yep, yep. Uh, the internet has spoken. So what's your big insight?
Well, a big insight actually is that we made an assumption that people don't want suffering, but yeah, that is also an assumption.
Yeah. And some kinds of suffering are more tolerable than others.
Yes.
My big insight is that it isn't helping me to stay silent and stuff things down, but it also isn't helpful to say, "See, told you so,"
Yes.
or to be combative in the moment. And so my insight homework, my insight action is just to explore. I mean, I don't know. This is not going to be something I'll figure out in 2 weeks, I don't think, but just to explore, what does it look like to speak in the moment with love? And maybe it's as simple as, "Oh, interesting."
I love that because I feel like that's what you've been doing. And by the way, I need to say I love that you've been learning about this in conversations on customer service, which is like not a
It's not a very
not a
spiritual setting, but that's my jam, is learning the
it,
big lessons in the small moments.
it's perfect actually, because when you learn your big lessons with people that actually matter to you the most, it's hard. But when you learn from, like you've done, like in this case with um someone that you don't know and it's there to help,
Yeah.
uh
It's
that's
probably trained to, like, deal with this kind of anger.
yeah, that's the perfect way to practice, I would say. Like, congrats to you. Like, I feel like I want to practice more in situations where it's not so heated,
Yeah.
where I get to like be curious, like, and instead of feeling like I can't get angry, I'm not gonna get angry, do like you did. Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna get curious and I'm gonna ask for help if need.
Yeah. And the, um, I guess, like, my second insight action would be, um, just continuing to, when I feel the anger come up, like, "Ah, what's deeper?" I mean, that's the activity of a lifetime, right? That's the mission
Yes.
of a lifetime, and it's so helpful for getting underneath the assumptions.
Yeah.
Um,
What's the suffering that I'm avoiding by creating suffering?
yes, yes. What's the suffering I'm avoiding by creating suffering? That's a great question. Let's put it
Hmm.
on a t-shirt.
Let's put it on a tissue. Yeah. Another thing that could be on a t-shirt is, in case of angry, ask for help.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Break
It's
the glass.
yeah, break glass, ask for help. Yeah. Um, hmm. But just, I just think of Buddha laughing, think of the guy in the parable. Is it
Mm.
so? I think of Guru Jagat. Okay. Like get so spiritually strong you can have conversations with people who disagree with you or who you disagree with. Which that phrasing is important, right? They're not disagreeing with you. They're believing what they're believing. You're disagreeing with them.
Mm. Good point.
Even that framing is like, why are you going against me and my friends? And isn't it all, it really helps me to think I'm playing into the system if I'm getting angry at it and I'm railing against it.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to give it my energy, even in the form of, pounding my fists against it.
Yeah.
Like, what could I really do? What could I really do that would hurt the system? I'm gonna go bake bread. I'm gonna go compost. I'm gonna go grow vegetables. I'm gonna go be loving to customer service people.
That's the revolution.
That's the revolution. It is, for sure.
Yes. I love it.
Curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. Let us know. Do you resonate with this feeling of anger being a suffering we create to mask the suffering of uncertainty, which we also create?
Let us know in the comments, and until next time.